Hey, my name is Shannon McClung. I'm an actor, a writer, and a podcast co-host.
And how in the hell did you decide you wanted to dive right into the entertainment industry? The craziest career, prospect anyone could have. How did that happen for you?
Growing up, I grew up in the 80s. And so I always just had a sense of play. Like whenever we were at recess in school, I liked playing sports and all the other things, Foursquare and whatnot. But I loved it when we could get a good game of Star Wars going on or a good game of Super Friends. And it wasn't until I saw my oldest sister in her junior high play that I thought that that was something I could do, and it was so cool seeing someone that I knew on stage, and there were lights, and, there was an audience, and they were laughing, and she wasn't that good. I'm like, "Well, I know I can better than that." So so after that, it was probably in 3rd grade that I did my first kind of school play, and, my teacher I was in an advanced reading class, and we had tackled this is gonna show you how advanced it is, Tyler. We had tackled It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. And she had asked us, would you all want to perform this? And we could invite your families. And everyone said yes. So when it came time to sort of divvy out the roles, everybody wanted to be Snoopy. But only one person could play Snoopy. So my teacher assigned me the role of Linus, which I was not happy about because, like, oh, that's the guy who sucks his thumb with the blanket. I want to be the dog who sits to sit on the doghouse and pretend it's a fighter plane. But it turns out Linus is actually kind of the central focus of that story. And the first time performing in front of people and hearing laughter, hearing reactions. I mean, it's addictive. And I did school plays throughout middle school, and then when I got to high school, I auditioned to be in a magnet program for visual and performing arts in Orlando, Florida. So I went to the same school as like Wayne Brady, and Joey Fatone is actually in the year ahead of me. So it was kids from all over the county who got to go to this school that had a focus on visual and performing arts. And while I was there, the idea of doing this in college came up, and my parents, who were not showbiz people at all. They're both from a very small town in West Virginia. They were like, "Yeah, we don't want you to do that." I mean, which as a parent, you understand their point of view. Like you want the best for your kids, and a career in show business is probably not high on most parents' lists. So I had tried to find a different major while I was kind of also auditioning for theater programs, and then neither one really worked out. All the programs that I wanted to get into, I didn't get into, and all the psychology courses that I took were just a flaming fail. Like, oh yeah, this is not for me. But I ended up going to Florida State University in Tallahassee and met some great folks, was in their sort of BA theater program. Like they have a very successful BFA musical theater program and a BFA acting program, but I didn't audition for those. So I went to their BA theater program, met some fantastic people, some of whom I'm still friends with today. And at the same time, because I grew up in Orlando, I worked for Universal Studios Florida as a performer, and I had auditioned to be in the Terminator 2 3D show, playing John Connor, playing the Edward Furlong role. And I was 17 at the time. So this would have been senior year in high school. I was 17 at the time. To be in that type of performance, you have to be a legal adult because there were stunts involved. So right before I went to Florida State, I auditioned again and I got it. And I explained the situation like, "Hey, I'm going up to Florida State." And they're like, "Okay, well, we'll train you and then, you can come back and work." And so after my freshman year, I really had a hard time with the acting classes that were being given. It was a lot of heavy method work that wasn't really my style. Like I tried, but I was like, this isn't fun. I mean, I got into this because it was fun. And so after my freshman year, I decided to stay in Orlando and work at Universal, and that was the best on the job training in terms of working professionally that I'd ever gotten. Getting to perform constantly. And, the longer I was there, the more shows they trained me in. And Orlando, at the time at least, didn't have like a huge film and television scene, but they did have a little bit. So I ended up booking my first independent movie there back in 2002, I think, with Talia Shire and W. Earl Brown from Dunsmore, or excuse me, from Deadwood. The movie was called Dunsmore. But after that, I ended up going to Japan for 2 years, living in Osaka, Japan, to work for the Universal Park over there. And the whole plan was, I will take these 2 years and save up a bunch of money so that when I move to Los Angeles, I don't have to hit the ground worrying about where my next rent check is going to come from. So having sort of like a solid nest egg, getting to work for Universal Hollywood here, so I was able to kind of do it at my own pace. Money does run out quickly, though. So so I definitely did have to do some jobs that I wasn't crazy about. But flash forward, gosh, it'll be 20 years in 2015, or no, excuse me, 2025. So thus far, I mean, it's the plan has been working slowly but surely. It's been working.
It sounds like, and that's a crazy journey you went on as well. It's a very it's an outlier compared to what people usually do, right? They usually go to college maybe, and
Mhm.
then either go to New York or Los Angeles and just try to go for it. But I mean, like you said, you had hands-on training, hands-on experience with one of the coolest jobs I could imagine as an actor, starting out professionally. I'm really interested to know, why was LA calling you? Why didn't you want to go to New York? Was there a certain reason why Los Angeles was the place to go at that point?
I always loved doing theater, but there was always just something so magical about movies and TV. I mean, whenever I could get someone from my family or one of my parents to go see a play with me, you could start the clock. They were going to be asleep in about 10 minutes. Um, with the movies, I guess my parents did fall asleep in those too, but it took longer. There was always there's just something about, sitting in a darkened theater in front of this, gigantic screen and watching these stories play out. I do like New York. I've had the opportunity to work there a couple of times. It's also at the type of city that, for the way I'm made, I'm like, this seems like a really hard place to struggle because you've got weather, you've got just the type of environment that I wasn't used to, sort of that those walking neighborhoods and subways. I mean, LA, which is obviously much larger than Orlando, but LA, the first time I came out to visit, I'm like, oh, this seems familiar. And also the weather is very similar, minus the humidity. It's very similar to Central Florida, which is which was what I was used to.
Which is fair. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, compared to Central Florida, I was born in Tampa. I've only been there a couple of times, but
Is that
yeah.
right?
Well, each time going down, man, I live in Colorado now. I want the dry heat. I can't do this. It's too much.
Whenever I would fly, like I got used to, became, acclimatized to the West Coast.
Yeah.
And whenever I fly home to visit my family, as soon as the cabin depressurizes, my hair falls down and my pores open up because the climate is like, I mean, I don't know how I dealt with it for, over 20 years, that the moment you step outside, your back is immediately just
Oh,
drenched with sweats.
that was it was a very real fear of mine, ever having to live there and then say go on a date, because the last thing you want to do is sweat, right? Just imagining 5 different changes of a top before you go, it freaked me out for a good long while. But going back to you after that weird tangent, sorry, the coffee is really kicking in today. Uh, while you were growing up, I mean, you were really into the performing part of it, essentially like creating stories and acting those stories out. And, you said you love Star Wars and just having that love for pop culture and cinema and entertainment. Did you have anybody you looked up to, not to idolize, not to model after, but, outside of your family looking at maybe, say, a certain performer or a certain director or writer and saying, "I wanna do what they do." Was there anybody that stuck out during those times?
Well, again, being the Star Wars and Indiana Jones fan, I mean, Harrison Ford was the guy that, whenever he would come on screen, he was just magnetic and he just played the coolest characters. But it wasn't until I saw Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future, because I had also watched Family Ties, which is the sitcom he was on in the 80s, that it occurred to me I had trouble separating the role from the person. And it was when I saw Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future that I'm like, "Oh, that's not Alex P. Keaton, and that's not Michael J. Fox, who I've seen on, talk shows." I'm like, "That's a different guy." And so, obviously Han Solo and Indiana Jones, they're different guys, but that's Harrison Ford. With Michael J. Fox, that was the first time I saw the distinct 2 different personalities, and for a young person, I mean, that was the first time that it clued into me that, "Oh, this is something he's doing deliberately." Like, it was just fascinating to me. Um, and then a performer that really just, his performance has always stayed with me was, Andre Braugher in Glory. Like, we had watched that film in a history class, and obviously in a film filled with award-winning performances, Denzel Washington won the, Oscar, I believe, for Best Supporting Actor. Andre Braugher's character always his journey was just so fascinating to watch where he began and where he ended. And just in terms of the craft, I'm like, "I wanna be able to do that."
That's awesome. And you know what? Glory is a movie I haven't revisited much,
Mm.
but you lit a fire underneath me. I need to watch it again right away because you're exactly right. And I do want to go back to, you moved to Los Angeles, you've had all this experience, and then you have these very talented people you've watched over the years. What was your first goal upon moving to Los Angeles? I mean, as far as performance goes, what was the first thing on your list you wanted to accomplish once you got there?
Not to have to move back to Orlando. That was number 1, but, I came out a lot of my, friends from Florida State had moved out here, and the majority of them, stopped acting, and because that's something I think when you move to Los Angeles, you might have the initial, impulse that you wanna be an actor, but when you're surrounded by the business, you see all of the other things that go into it.
Hmm.
And a lot of folks find things that they love more, which, at the time, like, it seems impossible for a young actor, like, "No, no, 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 I have to go be a movie star." When you see everything that goes into making a production, most of my friends found things that they liked doing better, so I came out probably, fairly ignorant. Um, I had a couple of friends that had told me, like, "Here are the websites you need to sign up for," like Actors Access and, casting networks and stuff like that. And then you need to get a commercial agent, and I'm kinda like, "Well, okay, but what about movies and TV?" Like, "Yeah, that's not the way it works." There's a process to this. And so the first objective was to get a commercial agent, which I got super lucky that I had submitted myself, for some commercial on casting networks, and the casting director, who I'll never forgive myself for forgetting her name, but she held me afterwards, and she was like, "I see you don't have an agent." And I was like, "No, I don't. I mean, I've done sort of the obligatory things you have to do," which is back then, you used to do a big mailing. And I'm like, "I haven't, heard anything back." And she's like, "Okay, I'm gonna give you the name of someone, and I'm going to call him, and I want you to make an appointment with him." And so I met this guy, this agent, and he was like, "Well, if she says you're good, I'll believe her." And he signed me. And so just got super, super lucky that I was in front of the right person at the right time. Unfortunately, I never booked a commercial. I ended up, meeting a couple of casting directors, and I ended up the first television series that I booked out here was House back in 2007. And it was for the season premiere. And so I had booked this television show, and it wasn't a large part, but it was an emotional part. So when it came out, I had a nice big emotional close up where it looked like I was on the cusp of crying. Like, is he about to cry? Is he going to cry? And from that, from casting directors seeing that, I started to get called in a little bit more, and they were calling my commercial agents. And he's like, I have no problem doing this for you. He's like, but you should probably try to find a theatrical agent. And I was like, well, that makes sense. And so using that, like I had spoken with a friend who had forwarded my name onto his agent. So I met with his agent, his theatrical agent, and the agent was just like, yeah, I'm on board. I saw your scene on House. It was really good. It's like, the only deal is I only take people across the board, and I don't know how much your audience knows, but across the board means they represent you theatrically and commercially. So you can't have two commercial agents. So then I had to go back to the original guy who took a chance on me and was like, hey, sorry, I, I I seem to be having a little more success on this side, so it seems like I should go with this agent. And he was, very understanding. He's like, yeah, I understand. Like, that's, if that's where your passion is, that's where your career is taking you, then go for it. And then right after that is when the writer's strike of 2008, 2007, 2008 hit.
Oh
And
god.
so, yeah, it was so frustrating because on the heels of that show coming out, it aired in, like, would have been like September. I started to get like these very nice auditions. And then when the writer strike hit, I mean, the town shut down for 4 months, 4 or 5 months maybe. Coming back only having one credit, like, people can become fans, but they can also have short memories. So it was sort of like starting over, like all the way over again. But yeah, that was the first goal, was to be like, can I get on TV? Like, let's see. Like, I knew so many people that I'd worked with in Orlando who came out here and weren't able to do it. And I had, people that I worked with again in Orlando who kind of discouraged the idea, like, unless you have really strong connections, like, it's nearly impossible. And so booking that first job was like, okay, this is hard. This is not impossible.
And it's a totally surreal experience, having your first TV credit, especially. Like you said, you had a close up, you had an emotional scene. I've had like the first few credits I had, it was counting, or maybe mumbling something off screen, but it's never been anything that pertinent to the scene. So I do want to ask you what that was like for you, hopping, on set. You're on House, one of the best shows ever written, ever made, and you are meant to deliver this scene. Where was your mind at? How did you, if you had any nerves, how did you calm yourself down? I mean, what was that experience like for you? Because that's always really crazy first time around.
A little overwhelming,
Mhm.
because going on, like, I'd been on lots before to audition, but when you are working on a show, like, you find the production assistant, like, they kind of give you some direction, like, hey, this is where we are, you're going to meet here. And at that point, a production assistant kind of held me by the hand, being like, all right, now we got to go here, no, we got to go here, now we got to go here, because I had said I've never done this before. Like, so if I'm messing something up, please correct me. So, again, a very nice PA who took me to makeup, took me to all the things. And the role, it was two different scenes. There was one where he thinks his girlfriend has died in a building collapse, and he's sort of mourning, and that's where he has an interaction with Dr. House. And then the second scene is him discovering that she's not dead. Like, she's actually in this full body cast, and she's so kind of mangled from a building falling on her, like, no one recognized her. So we started with that one. And I was just kind of, again, just overwhelmed, taking everything in. And the makeup artist was, putting everything on me, and she had actually gotten the scenes reversed. So she's like, hey, so you've been up for 72 hours. You're kind of, you're gonna look like hell. You've probably been crying. And so I can't see what she's doing. She's just doing all this stuff. And then I look and I see how tragic I appear and I immediately my eyes just welled up and I'm like, oh, okay, so that's how you do it. All right, great. And then she realized like, oh no, we're starting with the end. So she took all that stuff off, put just regular makeup on, and then walking in, Hugh Laurie wasn't there yet. Like the second scene is just myself and the other actor, and so just walking in, just overwhelmed. I mean, so excited, like all of these nerves, but still just kind of so grateful to be there because it was just sort of like the embodiment of like, oh, okay, this it's hard, it's not impossible. And I remember at one point, uh, I was smiling a little too big after seeing that she's alive, and the director, a guy named Darren Sarafian, who really nice guy. I can hear him. He's like, "All right, Shannon, smiling, smile. Too much, too much." And afterwards, he had said like, "Hey, so yes," he's like, "You're happy to see her." He's like, "But you can't go full, Colgate." And then I explained, I'm like, yeah, sorry. This is my first thing. He's like, you know what? You're doing great. Let's do it again. And then we got it in a couple of shots. And then doing that first scene, one of the ADs had told me after we finished the first scene, he's like, okay, so your next scene is literally the last scene of the day. Um, Flash forward 12 hours later, getting to meet Hugh Laurie and again having that difficulty of separating the person from the role. I'm like, this guy just looks intimidating, and like he spoke in his American accent the whole time. He never dropped it. He ended up being just a lovely guy. But yeah, just getting to share dialogue with him, with someone that I had only seen on the screen. It was fantastic.
Oh my god, that's such an amazing, like, big first credit to have. That just and it's a fantastic story too. I've never worked on a lot, but I can only imagine, the concentrated chaos as opposed to shooting on location, where things are kind of disbanded. It's just a lot. But then, you said strike happens. You have one credit. It's kind of like starting over from ground zero.
Yeah.
This is usually the time where, doubts start to creep in, or maybe you start to look for a backup plan. Did you have a backup plan in order, or were you focused on, no, this is what I want to do. I'm not going to, become an accountant. I'm going to focus on this.
I mean, I had told my father many times that if this showbiz thing doesn't work out, I'm gonna be in trouble because I have no other marketable skills. No, I mean, the friends that I had made here who had been, at it for a while had said like, look, this is crappy that everything is shut down. It's going to be resolved. It's gonna come back. And luckily, because I did have the job at Universal, I was still actively performing. And while we were here, I mean, there were still acting classes going on. There were still things. There were ways to exercise your craft. But no, I never had the inclination to think of like what's my backup plan. I mean, my my pseudo backup plan was the fact that I like to write, and I luckily have some friends who were writers as well, and I was able to start doing that a few years ago. And another one of those things that I'm like, I had no idea I was going to enjoy this as much as I do. But in terms of a backup plan, no, I mean, this was kind of it. I mean, I knew worst come to worst, I can always go home. Like I can always, my mother would be thrilled, even now, if I would come home. And because I do enjoy performing at Universal, I'm like, Universal ain't going anywhere, and in Orlando, and luckily, there are roles of varying ages. So again, worst come to worst, I can always go back and make a living. But in reality, no. Like this was it. This was the decision.
Ooh, you know what? I do want to dive into the writing portion of it. When that occurred, when you realized that, you could dive into writing and work with a group of people, what was that experience like for you? Did you guys just tackle into essentially, brainstorming a hypothetical screenplay? Were you looking at making your own content? Like, where did that lead you? That's really cool.
A friend of mine back in Orlando, we had come up with this idea. My group of friends in Orlando, we always talked about. We loved going to movies. We loved television, and we just loved being like, well, this movie was good. What if they did this? What if they did that? And he and I had come up with this concept that we thought was just the funniest thing. And while I was in Japan, a friend of mine bought me Final Draft, which is a screenwriting program. It's the one that a lot of folks use. And finally seeing how something is already kind of formatted for you and how you have your settings, and it's this key for action, this key for dialogue, this key for a character. Actually having those tools really kind of solidify, like, oh, okay, this is, again, it seems impossible, but it's not. And I remember I wrote a first draft, sent it to my friend who couldn't believe that I was able to write almost an entire script. And he's like, "Well, I feel like you don't really need me anymore." But then the two of us collaborated, and we were able to get it to a place that we were really happy with. And some of my friends who were writers out here, they started off as executives, development executives. So we sent the script to them, and they gave us some notes, but they're like, "Yeah, this is good. Like, you guys can write." I mean, we have no formal training. Our formal training is going to the movies. And I ended up getting hooked up with a manager, and he took the script out, and it got, for a couple of guys who had no idea what they were doing, it got a pretty good response. And we had signed a deal with one producer to kind of develop it. It didn't go anywhere. A lesson that I did learn in writing is you always want to have more more than one idea, because we got to go on all these meetings where I'm sure you've probably heard of, like, the water and couch tour. So we would sit down and be like, "Guys, we read the script, we loved it. What else you got?" And my friend and I kind of looked at each other like, "Ah." And so we found out after our first meeting, like, okay, have BS something. Like, we have to have something. So we had written a couple more features. And then the acting part started to take off. So that kind of fell by the wayside.
Mm.
My friend unfortunately fell ill and was not able to write the way that he used to. And then right when acting started to slow down a little bit, a friend of mine was running an animated series. A lot of my friends write in animation. A friend of mine was running an animated series, and we had lunch because we hadn't seen each other in a while. And he's like, "I remember reading that feature that you had written." He's like, "It was really good." He's like, Have you ever thought about writing for animation?" And it was the perfect environment to fail in, because it was a friend who was the boss essentially, and his number two was also a friend. And they're like, "We're gonna take you through this, and then you can see if you like it." And I wrote an outline, wrote a first draft. Months later, I got to see the final product, which bared no resemblance to what I had written. But they were just like, "Look, this happens. Like, this is no reflection on your ability. Like, but when you're writing a show, other factors come into play. Studios giving notes, networks giving notes." And from there, I decided, like, okay, let me see if I can write a couple of spec scripts, which is essentially just an episode of a show that is already on. So I wrote a couple of spec scripts. The same friend who had hired me the first time, I sent him that script. He was working for a bigger studio at this time, so they needed to see something. So he sent this. I think I wrote it was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles spec. He sent it into them. They're like, "Yeah, we'll give him a shot." So I got one script, which turned into two, which turned into three, which turned into four, which turned into me being pretty involved in creatively on season two of the series. And then few years went by, and another friend, Mike Vogel, who's one of the other geek buddies, he had signed a deal with a studio, and he had was working on a property, was working on Strawberry Shortcake, and he would send me stuff, and I never thought, like, I'm 44 years old, I'm a dude. I never thought I'd be writing on the Strawberry Shortcake, but his approach was so funny that it was like watching a sitcom. And so he would send me stuff like, "Hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that?" And then he asked me, he's like, "Would you want to give this a shot?" And I'm like, "Are you sure, man? Because I don't." And he's like, "No." He's like, "Trust me, you're gonna be fine." And then that turned into one episode, turned into two, turned into three, turned into four, turned into a few seasons now on the show. So I've been across the board, acting and writing, have been so supremely blessed and lucky that the folks in my life, people in my circle, have been able to give me a helping hand when I needed it.
Wow, I had no idea about that. So now you're making me wanna watch Strawberry Shortcake. And I'm going to have to explain that to so many people initially until they realize how great I'm sure it is. No, that's awesome, man, because I do want to know, you are writing, you're acting, and you've been working pretty consistently. But what keeps you creatively or spiritually satiated outside of the industry? When you're not writing, when you're offset and you're not doing self tapes, what makes you happy? What do you like to do?
I mean, I like my wife. My wife is she's a great lady. She's incredibly patient. Like just this morning, I'm working on a new project, and I wrote the first page and a half of an outline and just struggled with it. It was just torturous. And so I asked her, I'm like, hey, will you read this? And she read it, and she will give me her unvarnished thoughts at all time, and be like, well, who's the audience for this? Why would you use this word? What about this? What about this? I mean, she's supportive, but she's not blindly supportive. Like she very much will ask questions and offer opinions.
Oh, well, that's fantastic, especially, somebody you're with or even family, sometimes you give them something, "Oh, it's perfect. We love it." "Yeah, but I want you to rip it apart and help me grow." I need you
I'm
to
going to
tell me.
disagree. I'm going to
Yeah.
tell you you're wrong, but I need to hear it.
I may have slight tears, but I will walk away before they start pouring. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. No, that's fantastic. I love that you have that support too, and someone who is, like you said, unbiased and willing to give you criticisms to make that better as well. Because I know I'm getting closer on time here, I do want to know if you have a party story you could share with our listeners. So something that has occurred during your experience performing, during your fantastic career that stands out so immensely you could easily recant it amongst friends at a party. It could be funny, it could be tragic, it could be horrific. It's usually funny, just to give you a baseline. But if you have a story you could share with our listeners.
Well, it was tragic in the moment, but it's funny now. I had read for Teen Wolf, the MTV series, and the sides that I had gotten were from a previous episode. So, like, the role is going to be this. This isn't the role, and it was four, five, 6 lines, something like that, maybe about a page. And had a good audition. Found out the next day that I had gotten the job, and I remember it was on Friday. And they're like, hey, so we don't have a script yet, but you're going to work on Monday. Call time's going to be like 8 a.m. I'm like, okay, great. So Friday night goes by, no script. Saturday goes by, no script. So it's Sunday. And I'm like, okay, well, they know what they're doing. And I'm like, it has to be somewhat comparable to to the scene that I auditioned with. And what came in, it was for a police dispatcher. What came in was about a 3.5 page scene that the majority was police calls. I mean, there was like, stuff happening all over, and it's like, unit this, unit that. And, generally, memorization as actors is something we have to learn to do. And if you can do it quickly, that helps. And I've got a pretty good brain for memorization, but it's also, you're kind of relying on understanding either the narrative arc of the scene or the conversational arc of the scene, to be like, okay, feels like this is where this should go. Now, for someone who is completely ignorant to how police protocol works, I'm reading this and I am terrified. So I'm reading, and I'm like, okay, I think I got it. So I show up the next day. The actor who was playing the sheriff, whose name is escaping me right now, I want to say Landon something. He played Johnny Cage in the 1995 Mortal Kombat. Really, really nice guy. So as we're getting in the van to go to set, I've got my sides, and he's looking at the sides. He's like, "Oh, hey, by the way, I'm Landon." I'm like, "Hey, Landon, I'm Shannon." And he's like, "So you're the dispatcher?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he looks at it and goes, glad I don't have to do this. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Like, we're all acknowledging that this is really, really hard, that this is not easy. So we go down to shoot, and basically I'm at like a big desk, and I've got my, my mic, and the director says, "Hey, so this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna have you seated. You're gonna be doing your things." He's like, "We're gonna have a camera that's gonna be kind of circling around you. It's a very active, frenetic shot." I'm like, "Okay, that's new. I've not done that before." So we're doing the dialogue. The camera's going around, going around. We get to the end, like, "All right, we're gonna try something else." Whenever the camera is here, he's like, "Always have your face here. When the camera's over here, try to move your face over here." I'm like, "Okay, great." So we do it again, and I'm kind of like, "All right, this is hard." And we finish, and he's like, "You know what? We're gonna add one more thing." He's like, "Halfway through, we're gonna have you get up. So you're gonna start, the intensity of the moment. You have to stand as you're giving out these police calls." I'm like, "Okay, okay." So we do it again, and I'm sitting in like a rolly stool. So to get out of a rolly stool and not have it get in the cameraman's way is a challenge. So we're doing, oh, cut, cut, cut. All right, Shannon, when you stand up, don't kick the stool back. Like, you kind of just have to stand up gently. Kind of like, okay, okay. So then we get a couple shots of this, and I'm thinking, okay, I got it. We get to whatever take it is, and I reach this one particularly wordy part of the script, and I flub it. And it's not the type of situation where you can say, "Sorry, let me pick that up," because there's just so many moving parts. So we do it again. Get to that same spot. I flub it. And now it's that moment of like, okay, if I have to die, now's the time because I'm feeling so terrible about myself. And the director comes over, and he was an Australian guy who had a very kind of mumbly quality to his voice. Like, "Shannon, you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, sorry, it's just it's a lot." And then as he goes back to the monitor, the awesome cameraman leaned over, and he's like, "Hey, man," he's like, "if you want to set your sides right about here," he's like, "I can't see them." And I'm like, "Thank goodness." So we do it. We're able to get through the scene. I'm not feeling great about it, but it was like, okay, you made it out in one piece. And having been on set, I mean, the things that we see at home, like when it's someone's last day, like, "Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap on Tyler LaRocca." Yeah, that doesn't happen with someone who's been there for 3 hours. So everyone is just kind of gone. They are smoke. They are vapor in the wind, and I'm not feeling awesome. And then again, God, I can't believe I can't not remembering his name. Landon, I think, was just kind of like, "Hey, good to work with you, Shannon." I'm like, "Hey, thanks." And he could tell that I was not feeling great about it. And he grabbed me by the shoulder, and he went, "Look, what you had to do," he's like, "that was not easy." He's like, I know how you're feeling." He's like, "It's gonna look great." And he's like, "And I bet we're gonna see you again." And I was like, "Okay, thanks." So that made me feel a little bit better. Watching the show, the take where I look down, no one else can see it, but I can see it. Like, the take that I look down to get my place in the sides makes it into the cut. And then they end up penning me for a couple more episodes. Like, it never worked out. Like, the role always got written out at the last second. One that they actually ended up paying me for the shoot. But it was like, okay, he was right. It worked out okay. However terrible I was feeling in the moment, it wasn't actually that bad. So not bad that the mistake is in the cut.
That it added to your performance.
It looked like a choice. It was really me trying to find my place.
Like, "Oh, he's really into it. I think he looks really worried." Yeah. Meant to do that. That's all. And you had verbal affirmation by Johnny Cage himself. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I was waiting for him to finish me.
I have to got flashes of every single finishing move from the last 25 years. uh what, just for my own, research sake, which episode was that? Because now I have to go look it up. Do
I
you
want to
remember?
say it was season. I've got my phone right here. I can look it up here real quick. Um, and it was also the first time that my I was in the opening credits. My credit was in the opening credits, which that was a new thing for me. That was pretty big.
Oh, no way. Oh,
Let's
okay. I found it. Season 5, episode 10.
Season
Dispatcher
5, episode 10.
Patterson. Oh,
Dispatcher Patterson. Yeah.
I'm totally looking that up. That's awesome. Well, I mean, with that and with that experience you had, now would be a great time to ask, do you have any advice you could pass on to our listeners, whether it's somebody who's starting out right now pursuing their acting career or somebody who has been in it for a while and is just trying to stick it out and keep going for that next self tape, that next audition. Do you have any advice that you've sort of hung on to that you could like almost explore, express to our listeners?
Well, 2 actually. So, this casting director who I'm friendly with named G. Charles Wright, who has cast me a couple of times. He's a sitcom casting director. He had said something to me one time that I found so helpful going into the audition process. He's like, "When you go in the room, don't audition for the job, do the job." Like, keep it in your keep the control on your side. He's like, don't go in there asking for a job. Go in there and let them know this is what you get when you get me. And that put me at ease to a degree that I've never been able to replicate. I mean, for 3 seasons, that's or 3 years rather, I just would say that every time. Like, don't ask for the job, do the job. Don't audition for the job, do the job. And in terms of sticking it out, I mean, this is the type of thing that you have to love. You have to love it. Because otherwise, if you're doing it and you don't, when you hit those lean times, which every performer does, like it's a mathematical certainty. The love is what sustains you in those lean times. And you have to remember that if you don't book a role, it's not casting or the producers or the showbiz gods pointing their finger at you saying we don't want you. It's not that. It's just someone else's time. You're gonna get what you're supposed to get. And I think as actors, we're emotional basket cases from time to time. I think we take things very, very personally. And if you want to take it personally, you have to take it personally with the victories as well. Like this was your time, but it's a job, and it's a job that you have to love to keep going. But also if you're in LA, if you're in New York, if you're in Atlanta, anywhere else where they shoot, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, don't let it be your entire personality. Don't let it be the thing that you identify, that people identify with you. Like, live a full life, because at some point like this, it will end. Like, and you want those things that do mean so much to you, like family, friends. That's the thing that you want to be remembered with. Because as awesome as this line of work is, when we get to work, it can go away, and you just want to hold on to those things that aren't going to, like your family and your friends.
Absolutely. I feel like we've learned that even more so in the last 3 years, especially 2020. No, I thank you for that. I appreciate both of those pieces of advice. And with that, as we wrap up, I want to know, do you have anything that I can give a shout out to or promote within the episode notes?
Yeah. So I was just on the season premiere of Party Down on Stars. They came back for a third season 12 years later. The show that I wrote for, Strawberry Shortcake, Barry in the Big City, seasons 1 and 2 are both on Netflix, and I wrote a good chunk of some of those episodes. And obviously, I'm biased, but I think the show is very, very funny. I mean, obviously, we're making it for a younger audience, but there are jokes in there that make me laugh every time.
That's all. See, you're just selling me on Strawberry Shortcake, man. I don't know what else to do. I was gonna watch or rewatch Breaking Bad, but now I think it's gonna be Strawberry Shortcake. I got to do it. I need something
Well,
different.
Strawberry Shortcakes, the episodes are 4.5 minutes, so you will definitely get through it quicker.
Perfect. Perfect. I do want to say before we wrap up and I end this recording that I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your, like I said, your Sunday to sit down and talk about yourself, something that I think is hard for anybody to talk about. But sharing your story, it's really, really appreciated. And thank you so much for your time.
Tyler, thank you. This has been a lot of fun, and also as someone who is a fan of the movie Wind River, I see you.
Oh, how dare you, sir? That has never happened. So thank you. Thank you very much. You can't see it, but behind me is my manifestation of hopefully starring in a Rocketeer reboot. So fingers crossed for that.
You
Oh
mean
no. What do you
this Rocketeer?
Oh, buddy. I I've been hiding. I have a whole like Rocketeer plethora on my bookshelf. And yeah, just so much. So much. I'll have to talk to you later about that. But oh my god, I feel so seen. I do have one thing we do before we end each recording, and that is what I like to call an awkward goodbye.
Okay,
Have you ever seen the movie Wayne's World?
I have.
Okay. Remember the scene where Wayne leaves because Rob Lowe has screwed over their production and Garth is left to his own devices in front of that blue screen, just mumbling nonsense and really scared?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. The cool nuts.
Yeah.
Yes, I do remember
So
the scene.
that is the origin point for the end of the show. All I'll do is I'll give you a, silent 3, 2, 1 cameraman, and then I'll point. When I point to you, give me your best verbal awkward goodbye, and I'll stop the recording from there. Sound good?
Okay. All right.
All right, buddy. Here we go. In